What is this? Some sort of Zelda clone rip-off thing? It looks just like A Link to the Past. Don't developers know that Zelda is sacred and making an adventure game from this perspective is stealing? Whoa there, friends. This ain't like that. Yeah, sure, it's cartoony, colorful. Yes, this dude has a hat and sword, but this game is quite different. It might walk and quack like a Zelda Link adventure, but Crusader of Centy is very much its own thing. Just because a game shares some similarities with another doesn't make it a rip-off. Well, yeah, okay, sometimes it's just a rip-off. People, this is Ragnacenty, or Soleil, but we'll be calling it Crusader of Centy, because that's what it's called over here. This is an action-adventure game released by Nextech. The Japanese original dropped in 1994, but it took nearly a full year for it to see the Soleil of day in other regions, which is kind of unfortunate because it's a solid, competently crafted little release for the 16-bit Sega home consoles. By the time it landed over here, though, the Sony PlayStation was almost a thing, so I think it's fair to assume that Soleil was eclipsed by the hype of that machine, which sucks, because this is one of the best exclusives for the Mega Drive Genesis, and it has become quite rare to find at a reasonable price. Sega really needed more games like this too. The 16-bit console had a ton of great sports, action, and arcade titles, but it lacked a little when it came to things like RPGs and fantasy adventures. This story follows Corona. He's a kid who, at 14, has to start fighting some stuff. It's your birthday, but there's no time to celebrate. You're Corona. You're 14, so you had better go out and rid the world of all of those demons. No, you're not old enough to legally be Corona, but you are Corona, so get out there and save the world. 14 is a good age to go on some adventures. Your dead dad did it after all, says Mum. World galloping, death wielding, animal manipulating Corona. All you need to know is that you're a humanoid creature. The animals in this world don't speak the same language as the humans, imagine that. It makes for a pretty creative, impactful story once you're able to start communicating with all of the creatures. As a guy who rarely cares about video game narratives from this era, I'll admit that it's worth paying attention to the story in Crusader of Centy, until, that is, it starts getting all up its own ass. Ragnacenty is simply bursting with character. All of the enemies and animal pals are well drawn, smoothly animated, and lively. It literally and figuratively has lots of character, and the story is unique, but as I mentioned earlier, it does get in its own way a bit. I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a point where everything feels like it's wrapping up, with a large boss that definitely feels like the final encounter. It isn't, and what follows feels like a series of mostly uninspired fetch quests that largely feel like padding. Perhaps they were going for a bit of a Zelda 3 feel by having a big bad encounter followed by more game, but it doesn't really work for me. Basically, it forces the player to retrace their steps through the limited amount of playable areas. There are a few clever gimmicks, such as weather changes and time travel sequences that alter the lives of NPCs you've already visited, but it might have been a bit more seamless if these mechanics were built into the story from the get-go. It's creative, but it also feels like it ruins the pace. This is where the story starts getting a little too complicated for its own good as well, with tons of exposition getting dumped on the player at every turn. Speaking of playable areas, Crusader of Centy has an overworld map similar to something like Mario 3, but it's very basic. There are a handful of different places to choose from with familiar themes: ice, fire, desert, water, sky. It's a bit like Newtopia in that every traversable section works as its own world, more or less. It isn't a grand adventure as much as it is a series of puzzle box stages culminating in final boss encounters per area. I say encounter in lieu of fight because a lot of them are systematic, simple, and rather gimmicky, but I consider this a good thing. The big bads aren't really a challenge once you figure out what you need to do to defeat them. On one hand, it's nice that they don't rely on reactionary brute force all the time. On the other, it makes replaying the game a bit trivial since after you've figured out their simple puzzles, there really is no way to fail. The ones who are reliant on traditional pattern memorization are way too easy. The bosses have basic patterns at best, and the only hurdle usually boils down to parsing out which animal buddy or combination of them works best against a particular foe. Along the way, your animal arsenal will grow. Your first ally is your pet dog, and it's as adorable as it sounds. I could do without the pop culture references a lot of the NPCs and animals make, as they haven't aged well, but aside from that, it's a charming system and a creative mechanic. Again, I'm not going to directly go out of my way to spoil anything here, but all of these creatures were written into the story very well, with memorable little character arcs. Each and every one of them are unique with their own purpose in the world, and it never gets old seeing how they adapt and grow as the game progresses. Corona doesn't evolve very much beyond the sword mechanics, but your brethren certainly do, and combining specific ones fashions new attacks as well as buffs. It's also worth mentioning that these buddies allow you to fling your sword around in a variety of ways, and, most importantly, a bunny teaches you how to jump, which is even better than it sounds because throughout the game you actually hop the same way it teaches you to. It's goddamn adorable. Like I said, this game has character. No, it's not as refined as some action-adventure titles, but what it lacks in its pacing and combat, it makes up for with personality. Yeah, so combat isn't wonderful. It's floaty, inconsistent, and a bit frantic. This might be a me thing, but I still can't get fully into it. The best way to take down normal enemies is to charge up the sword and fire it out as a projectile, but the hit detection is spotty. It's never terrible and it doesn't ruin the experience in any way, but it just never feels as good as it should. There's no oomph. Enemies don't stagger much, if at all, which makes it hard to tell if a hit is even being registered. My only problem with the regular stage-to-stage fighting is that enemies swarm, and I mean swarm. It feels more like an attack button spam fest than a well-constructed combat system. It's serviceable only because the levels are a lot more skewed towards puzzle problems and navigating tricky terrain than baddie battles, but I think a more responsive fighting system would have helped to take this game from great to amazing. There's also that sound Corona makes when he takes damage. It would be annoying if it weren't so damn hilarious. Motokazu Shinoda's score for Crusader of Centy is also great, but again, not amazing. But wait, hear me out, because I do think all of the arrangements are catchy, incredibly well composed, and sound terrific on the 16-bit Sega hardware. My problem is that some of the tracks don't fit the stages they belong to. Shinoda absolutely mastered that Yamaha FM sound chip in the Sega hardware. Each piece of music is crisp and clear, with excellent low-end bass and percussion sounds. The melodies are catchy as all get out, and the high-end treble cuts through beautifully, but I'm not sure how I feel about heavy butt rock guitar approximations in my whimsical, cartoony fantasy game. Every track is masterfully written and perfectly delivered, but they don't always fit in with what's happening on screen. I will admit that when the music fits, it really fits, and adds something truly special to the intricate stage designs. I'll also say that over the course of my many years with this game, the odd choices have grown on me, and I can't picture anything different in place of some of the stranger pieces. Look, I could go on and on about Crusader of Centy, but I think you get the idea. It looks like A Link to the Past without being a copycat. It's charming, it's fun, and it's easy to play. You can save anywhere, and it's pretty short, which makes it extremely accessible to casually plug away at. I grabbed a pretty tattered cart a couple decades ago at this point for like a quarter when people used to dump all of their game collections off at pawn shops. At the time I used to scour secondhand stores and fill grocery bags with games a couple times a week. Nowadays, with retro gaming being what it is, you'd be lucky to find this thing for anything less than a kidney and a blowjob, but I do think everyone should give Crusader of Centy a shot, especially if you like block puzzles, cause there's gonna be some block puzzles. A lot of block puzzles. Remember, there's nothing wrong with finding an alternative way of playing an old game. Don't let pussy fart purists ruin your day because you aren't sitting in front of a 16-bit Sega with a CRT in your face. Just enjoy it any way you can, because Crusader of Centy is a great time. And remember, most of those elitist purist game collectors are the ones who spent the majority of their high school days inside their own lockers with piss in their pants and back knee. Play Crusader of Centy and let me know what you think, because hey, I'm always there for you, sweetie. Psst. Block puzzles.
Some Zelda games. This one might look the same. It's a rip-off you claim, but you're wrong. Corona he spreads across all the land. Speaking animal words, he kills demons and herds with sword in hand from beaches and the sands. Can you believe what this game succeeds to achieve? From all the things that you see, I bet you really want to experience all of it. A Buddha here.